My name is Rachel Kay. I work in our centralized training function here at Google, and it is my honor to introduce to you Professor Stuart Diamond, who is the author of Getting More: How to Negotiate to Achieve Your Goals in the Real World. This book has just very recently been published and is already off to incredible critical acclaim. It has been named #1 on the Wall Street Journal's blog as the best business book and the #1 book to buy in this year. It is the #1 on the USA Today, and next week we'll see that it's #5 on the New York Times bestseller list. So it's really a pleasure to have Professor Diamond here. I would love to run through all of his accomplishments, but then you wouldn't hear from him. So I'll just give you a few highlights. He has a law degree from Harvard and an MBA from Wharton. He teaches Wharton's most popular course in the negotiations that this book is based upon. And he has experience in academia. He's taught at Columbia, at NYU, Berkeley, Harvard, and more. And he has experience in the real world. The reason that this stuff works is that he uses it every day. And as the president of the Global Strategy Group, his business, Professor Diamond helps many other clients around the world achieve what they need through his techniques. A few quick highlights. It was Professor Diamond's tips and techniques that helped end the writer's strike in 2008 in Hollywood that many of you in this country will remember. He's also the CEO of an airline in St. Thomas, and he's the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist of the New York Times. So yeah, he's covered all the bases. But on a more personal note, this course, this content has actually changed my life. I had the privilege of taking his course, semester-long course, and have been working with Professor Diamond here for over 3 years as he brings this material to Googlers and watch them use it every day. But I have to say that the thing that is most striking is how googly he is. Professor Diamond is very intent on respecting others, growing the pie rather than cheating others out of their fair share in order to get what is best for everyone. He respects and admires diversity and looks to surround himself with that in everything that he does. And fairness and collaboration are a central thread to all of his business efforts. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Professor Stuart Diamond. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you all very much. It's an honor to be here. I want to talk to you about something today that you do all the time. Every single interaction you have in your life involves negotiation, whether talking to your friends, walking down the street and passing somebody, negotiating for a job in business, and everything else that you do. And most of the instructions that you have been given about those interactions since you were little are wrong, which is to say that they don't meet your goals very well. And that is true not just in daily life, but in diplomacy, in business, and in everything we do. The climate that results from following a series of wrong instructions supports what happened in Tucson, supports Congress voting, pushing through and then repealing, trying to repeal a health care law, and focus on all the controversies that we have in the world come from the wrong instructions. And so what Getting More provides is a new and different method of human interaction, one that'll be familiar to you and that I'm sure you support, but one within the page of Getting More lays out in a structure that you can replicate in everything you do. And this new form of human interaction, this different way of thinking, says that perceptions and emotions are more important than power and logic. That the pictures in the heads of the other party is more important than any collection of facts, evidence, or resources that you can possibly muster. That making a connection with another person is the most persuasive thing that you do. And that force, power, win-win, my way or the highway, BATNA, good cop, bad cop, walking out, generally do more harm than good. In addition to that, they get only about 25% of the value of doing it a different way, which is something I'll talk about in a few moments. And of course, the focus on people and relationships does not mean you have to be a patsy. This is a very strong way of negotiating and protecting yourself, but it's a way that protects yourself in a humane and ethical way. And so I wanted to talk just a little bit about this process, and then I'll entertain some questions. In addition to being something you do every day, it's hard to find this stuff because it's buried in ordinary language. In fact, the difference between success and failure is very, very small. I like to use a baseball analogy. If you're a 280 hitter in baseball and you get one extra hit every 9 games, you become a 310 hitter in baseball, and that's worth 2 things to you. 1, a place in the Hall of Fame, and 2, $10 million more a year. And so you can't find these tools. They're mostly invisible unless you already know them. And let me give you a couple of examples, one from another company, one from Google, to show you what I mean. I had a student, a former student, works at Exxon, flew up to Philadelphia a couple of weeks ago on a Southwest Airlines plane. Plane was 4 hours late. The rest of the passengers were snarling at the flight attendants and all the other airline personnel. And this former student of mine thought about the pictures in the heads of the other parties. He went up to the flight attendants and the other airline personnel. He apologized for everybody else's behavior, and he commiserated them that their workday was going to be 4 hours longer. And when he got off the plane, they gave him $600. The only one on the plane for that to happen to, because he understood that it was about them, not him, that he needed to make the connection with, and he needs to step out of the emotion of the moment. Second, and it's invisible unless you already know how to do that. I had a student at Google here, Francois Stern. I know Francois is here today. Francois is still head of one of the heads of network administration here and network sales. And he was in Southeast Asia doing a deal with a client. And the client couldn't afford Google's pricing, couldn't do the deal. And so Francois probed a lot more deeply into what this other party was about. In the deal, outside the deal, what are your hopes and dreams? Who are you as a person? And found out that the client was having a lot of trouble financing another venture that had nothing to do with Google. And the client also had a whole bunch of fiber optic cable that had been sitting around for a while that it really could use the cash flow for and really didn't care that if it got rid of. And so Francois went to the senior management of Google and got a loan for this company at favorable rates to finance its other venture, and in return got a 96% discount on the fiber optic cable, saving Google $500 million. That is also invisible. The notion of making a connection with them, no matter what the deal is, and finding something to get more with. Now, you don't have to devote your life to negotiation actively, but the more you know about what's going on around you, the more you can make critical interventions. And so my students learn to be exquisitely more conscious of the world around them. A simple analogy is there's an old maxim about the difference between expert and non-expert knowledge. And non-expert looks at a field and sees flat land. An expert looks at the same field and begins to see little peaks and valleys, little bits of relief. It takes no more time or energy for the expert to collect the greater amount of information from that landscape than the non-expert, but the expert can make much better use of that information to pursue opportunities or minimize risks. So what we're talking about is getting you to be much more conscious about the topography of your life and what's around you, because let's face it, you cannot avoid negotiations. They hit you in the face. Whether you like it or not, you can do them well or badly. You saying I avoid negotiations means you stand on the sidelines and they get to score touchdowns all day long. And so you have to decide how much to use it, but once again, once you have it in your arsenal, you always see it. But before, it's invisible. And so what I want to do, before I show you the specific tools, I just want to have a little menu of people and companies that have benefited from this. I had 3 women, the last one here in my class, from India, who got out of their own arranged marriages in India using course tools, with their parents' blessing, after the invitations had been sent out and daddy paid for the wedding, with somebody from a different sect, which is almost unheard of. Of course, 4-year-old, brushes teeth, goes to bed, no problema. And we'll talk about that a little bit too. And so these things are meant to be used in any kind of a situation. I had somebody named Mehul Trivedi, who was a student of mine at Wharton, and he took my course because he got dinged, rejected by 18 companies. So he came to see me before the course began, and I said, fine, we're going to get you offers from the same companies. And he said, Professor Diamond, with respect, you're crazy. And I said, well, let's see. And so I told him, what I want you to do is not send the same resume to each firm. I want you to write 18 different resumes, each one catering to the pictures in the heads of the department that you're interviewing with and the people who are interviewing you. What are their hopes, dreams, fears? Talk to alumni, talk to former employees, ask HR, ask the people themselves as you do repeated interviews. Well, he gave up after 12 final interviews, a fistful of job offers, and he just took one and says, the rest is obvious, I'll get the other 6. Okay. So, again, pretty invisible, but again, focused on the model that I've talked about. So, this is a comment by one of my former students from Microsoft, and this is a comment from Patrick Grandinetti at Google from taking the course. About, I guess, 300 people or so have taken the course here, and they have benefited widely. Okay, well, let me talk about the 4 different levels of negotiation and to tell you what's wrong and what we can do about it. The first level, the traditional level, is getting people to do what you will them to do. Threats, leverage, power, my way or the highway, take it or leave it, bat and alternatives to agreement, walking out, etc. The problem is not that it doesn't work. It works. With $20 trillion, the United States can do whatever it wants in the Middle East. The problem is it's really expensive, it takes a long time, and it's not self-enforcing. In addition to that, it tends to cause retaliation and resentment. And so that means the kids kicking and screaming on the floor, malicious obedience at work, or terrorists in the Middle East. It's not a real happy situation. And if you think that BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement, works, the next time you're out to dinner with your spouse or significant other, in the middle of dinner, pull out your little black book and say, you know, if this doesn't work out, I got these whole bunch of alternatives here. See what happens. So that also tends to piss people off. And so, but this is the tool of choice in work, at play, in the world, right? The United States can have sanctions on Korea and Iran like it has with Cuba until the end of time. All it's doing is promoting what I call the Alamo strategy. They will fight to the last man standing. And so that's the problem, and it's not a way to approach negotiations effectively. It gets about 25% of the value of what you can get by the model I propose. And to as evidence of that, I'd like to call your attention to the work of John Nash, a Princeton mathematician who won a Nobel Prize for a bunch of theories, including this work, was played by Russell Crowe in the movie A Beautiful Mind. What Nash did is he proved mathematically the 1755 theorem of Swiss philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And what Rousseau hypothesized is when parties collaborate, the overall size of the pie expands to such an extent that each party gets much more than it could get alone with a smaller pie, no matter how big that smaller pie is and how much of that smaller pie the person got. And the really good example that he used is 4 hunters individually can only get a rabbit. Together they can bring down a deer. And that's a different way of thinking about this. You think that the Congress, the Democrats, forced a health plan down the Republicans' throat, then the Republicans got in office, and they're trying to repeal as much of it as they can. Would you say that's consistent or inconsistent with what I've just said? The result is we're not getting a very good health plan. And so that's the problem with that attitude. So let's go, and these are examples of how people act. The people on the left get 4 times as much as the people on the right. They get twice as many deals, and each deal gets twice as much. Now, if you're a hard bargainer and you do the one on the right and you say, well, I'm doing just fine, and that's what, until now, hard bargainers have been able to say, well, if they didn't have the comparison to the column on the left. They were in a vacuum. But now there's a comparison. I've taught 30,000 people in 45 countries over the last 20 years. I've read more than 1,000 studies, 500,000 pages of journals and research material, and it wasn't until 1998 that I began to see that people weren't meeting their goals very well. And over the last dozen years, I began to develop this based upon what happened in the real world, including my own ventures. Okay, power also is unstable and unpredictable. This is in the Middle East. People don't like when I mention what the nationalities are, you can figure it out. But this tank is not about to run over this little boy. Not with the whole world watching. So, you know, you might lose your power in an instant. You might appear extreme if you use your power too much. The way to use power is to use just enough to meet your goals, and the other person shouldn't be able to feel it. That's the way one should look at this. Okay, let's go to the next level. This is what people have done, the cognoscenti, for the last 30 years. Win-win, interest-based negotiation, rational actors, etc. That's better. People see a rational benefit to them, and they're willing to go along with it. And that works with really rational people with no emotions, sitting with their spreadsheets in a conference room. Everybody is really calm. That doesn't work very often. And so it's either irrelevant or not reflective of what goes on. We live in an irrational, emotional world. And the more important the negotiation is to the parties, the more irrational they are. And that means world peace, $1 billion deal, or my kid wants an ice cream cone. And so therefore, you've got to take people's emotional temperature and deal with their emotions. If the local school board or municipality has raised taxes, I don't want to know from win-win. I want to know how you're going to make my life better. I want an emotional payment, empathy, I understand, some compassion, some way to make me feel better. The right answer to the statement, I hate you, is tell me more. Because you're obviously exercised and you're not listening if you're exercised. I need to get you to listen to me. These are really powerful tools to use when people are emotional. Not telling them to calm down, but listening to what they have to say, whether they're crazy or not. It is obvious that the president of North Korea mostly wants love. He wants to join the trade committees. He wants people to respect him. Every time some American shows up, he rolls out the red carpet. He releases prisoners. He talks to the South. He's like Danny DeVito in that movie with the beautiful woman, other people's money. He gets himself all gussied up and ready. Don't we get it? You know, so these are emotional payments. I once told my class at Wharton that I tell my wife sometimes that she's right, even when she's not, to preserve marital harmony. And then I thought, well, that's not fair to keep it from her. So I went home and I said to my wife, you know, honey, I told my class today that I tell you sometimes that you're right, even if you're wrong. And you know what she said? That'll work. So people want emotional payments, and that's the first thing you need to do in negotiations. And so it brings us to the third and fourth levels, to perceive what you want them to perceive and to feel what you want them to feel. Almost nobody goes there, and I think the story of the writer's strike will prove instructive here. I was called about 3 years ago by Ari Emanuel, who's the leading agent in Hollywood, the role model for Entourage, and the brother of Rahm, who was the White House Chief of Staff, to help them with the writer's strike. The writers have been on strike for 3 months. They've been without a contract for a year, no new TV material, nobody was talking to anybody. They had finally scheduled a breakfast with the studio reps for that Thursday morning. It was a Tuesday afternoon. So I got on the phone with the Writers Guild people and a bunch of other people, and they wanted to know what the priority of the substantive issues are, what the royalty rate should be, and other contractual issues. And I said, forget all that stuff. Go to the breakfast and ask the people from the studios 3 questions. Question number 1, are you happy? We're not happy. Question number 2, are you making money? We're not making any money. Question number 3, if you had to do this over again, how would you guys do it? It took 30 minutes to restart the negotiations. It took 2 days to get an agreement. Now, there's 2 things I can say for sure about this. 1, it's not rocket science. And 2, unless you already know how to do it, it's completely invisible. And so that's what we're talking about, is learning this stuff that's invisible to the other party. Things like, are my actions meeting my goals? Of course they have problems in the Middle East because the wrong people are negotiating, people that are emotional. You know, they already have peace in the Middle East. 600,000 Palestinians and Israelis live together. They should be negotiating. And so those are the kinds of things that come up. This is the model based upon a lot of research that supports what I've been talking about, and this has particular relevance to Googlers. And when I mention this, it would take some getting used to, because it's very different from probably the model that you've seen in your own heads in terms of Google's success. Less than 10% of the reason why people reach agreements has anything to do with the facts and the substance. Has almost nothing to do with how good your engineering is, with the substantive knowledge you have. More than 50% has to do with whether the people like you or not, and another almost 40% has to do with what process you use. Do you deal with emotions? Do you get commitments, etc.? And if you think this is this top blue triangle is the negotiation. Sadly, you're going to be right more than you're persuasive. This is very hard for people who are substantively based to grasp, but it's absolutely true based upon a ton of research. Why was O.J. Simpson found not guilty by the first jury in Los Angeles, despite a yard of DNA evidence, including his blood at the site? It's because the jury, the inner city jury, didn't like or trust the prosecutor, and if they don't like you and they don't trust you, they won't hear you. Now, Google has been wildly successful because of this blue triangle up here. That you're so far ahead of the pack that you've done great. I read this book, this treatise in business school called The Myth of U.S. Industrial Supremacy, and there's a line in there that stuck with me. It said, there is no human enterprise, organization, or civilization that cannot, given enough time, be ruined. And so what I'm thinking about is it's fantastic, but it doesn't last forever. That additional skills are needed. I gave a presentation at Microsoft about 4 or 5 years ago to the business development and legal department, and the first thing I did was that I told the 300 people there that I had Googled Microsoft and that I had typed in 3 words, Europe hates Microsoft. And I said, why did I get 5 million hits in a tenth of a second? I said, you think that cost you money? You think the fact that people don't like you means they won't buy your products, even if it's the best on the market for their application? And so this is something that one needs to pay a lot of attention to, which means that the characteristics and sensibilities of the person sitting across from you so dwarfs every other part of the negotiation is not even worth talking about race, religion, gender, culture, creed, unless you know who's sitting across from you. If you bring 3 people to a negotiation on Monday, and so do they, and you bring a 4th person on Tuesday, it's a completely different negotiation. Even with the same 6 people, somebody's kid might be sick, somebody have had a bad commute. So the first thing I've got to do is take the emotional temperature of the person sitting across from me, even if, and perhaps especially if, I'm married to them. There is no Google way to negotiate. There is no American way to negotiate. There are just individuals and the pictures in their heads. I've had the opportunity to read the titles of all 2,200 negotiation books written since 1950, as well as 400 or 500 books themselves, and I found some doozies. Here's one of my favorite. How to Negotiate with the Japanese. Well, what's wrong with that? What? You're negotiating with 130 million Japanese? How interesting. You're negotiating with a person or a couple of people who may be more or less the same as the cultural norm. So I want to figure out what are the pictures in their heads. A more dramatic example, if you were a Jew in Poland in 1944 and you thought the Nazis were monolithic and you met Oskar Schindler, you lost your life. Because you didn't realize that Schindler, although a Nazi, was willing to save your life, but you never asked him because you thought all Nazis hated Jews. What a source of competitive advantage it is to know who's really the same and who's really different. And so that is a tremendous competitive advantage for you. You may have more in common with somebody who is your sworn arch enemy than you do with somebody who sits next to you at Google if you just took the time to find out. Once you do that, you then have to figure out whether your perceptions match. And if they don't, what do you do about it? And I put this up in my classroom when I teach. And I point to the red dot and I say to people, okay, what do you see? 2 words or less, and I get these answers and hundreds more. I get vast disagreement about what people saw from a simple picture. Only less than half of the answers contain the word red in it. And in addition to that, most people process a small amount of the available information. Clearly, there's more white space than red dot. And so what you think is the perception doesn't mean that they think it's the perception. And for example, we did a role reversal, and this is in the book at Google. One of the attorneys, I had him play a salesperson. He played a salesperson for 5 minutes, and he said, you know, I was amazed after 5 minutes at how much I hated lawyers at Google. And so because there are different perceptions that you have to find out based upon different ways that people have been brought up, on influences on them, and you need to find out. So every time you have a disagreement with somebody, you need to check your perceptions and theirs. This is even a much more serious problem than that. I'm sure you've all seen this picture. I'm not going to go through the details of it for time, but if you want to ask me after you can, there are 2 women in this picture, a young woman to the left of the picture, and an old woman, which is sort of the whole picture. One's mouth is the other's necklace, one nose is the other's chin, and so forth. I've given half of this picture to a class, the young woman, and the old woman to the other half of the class, and I've asked them to stare at their half for 5 minutes while I took this off the screen. Then I put the combined picture back on the screen. What do you think happened? Well, almost nobody could see the other one. So the question is, if people have trouble seeing an image they know is there after seeing a contrary image for 5 minutes, how much trouble does one culture have seeing another culture's point of view that has seen the same picture for 1,000 years? And when I say culture, I mean production versus marketing, legal versus sales, you know, Mets versus Phillies. I don't just mean Arabs and Jews. Okay, so this issue is much more serious. They're not being stubborn. They're not being recalcitrant. They're not being stupid. What you see so clearly is not there for them at all. It doesn't exist. And so you've got to start at the beginning. What are the pictures in their heads? And what I think is black, they may think is white. And you've got to find out, friend or foe, or you don't have a prayer to persuade them willingly, only by force. So, and there are some things in the book that talk about this. The next point I want to make, which is related to this, should resonate with you very much. There's 2 studies I want to commend to you. They're both in the book to think about. The first study said that work groups in which there are varying perceptions, where people disagree with each other, produce 3 times as many marketable ideas than consensus groups. The second study shows, it's a study of U.S. cities, that for each 10% of diversity added to an area, net income of people in it goes up 15%. That is an enormous figure. It is no magic that Silicon Valley is outside of San Francisco, which is the most diverse city in the United States and has been the quickest major city to come back from the recession. So if someone you stand for diversity. If somebody says to you with some frustration that you disagree with each other, you've got to say, that's great, we're going to make money. Homogeneity, not profitable. Difference is profitable. Let's disagree with each other some more so we can make some money. Okay, so I want to turn the paradigm on its head and value differences, and from that, get creativity. So how do they value things? Do they value things different from you? Had somebody at Google that I taught who couldn't get a client. He found out about the client's life. Found out the client had a daughter, was having computer problems, high school age daughter. Guy from Google took his own time, went over to the guy's house for a Saturday morning, tutored the daughter, fixed the computer, got a multi-million-dollar account. And so that's trading items on equal value, time for a multi-million-dollar account. The client thinks, here's somebody who cares about me. As long as you deal, and this is also different from interest-based negotiation because it uses all of the synapses in each party's head. The CEO of a major company in Philadelphia once told me the most important thing he ever did for his major client in a 20-year business relationship was to pick up the client's CEO's mother-in-law at the Philadelphia airport one Saturday night. Has nothing to do with any deal, but it affects every deal. Had another Googler in one of my classes here who a vendor raised prices on him to a significant extent. And so he thought about the pictures in the vendor's head and realized it's very hard for vendors to get into big companies like Google. And so he said to the vendor, I'll tell you what, you hold the price and I will provide you introductions to other departments at Google. What you do after that is your concern. You get the job, you don't get the job, but I'm going to provide you the opportunity. For the provision of the opportunity alone, the vendor held the price. And so that's what I mean about a different way of thinking about how people interact with each other. I do want to talk for a minute about kids. This is my 8-year-old son, Alexander, my favorite negotiating partner, soon to be my co-star on YouTube. But I want to mention something about kids. Kids are very negotiable if you learn the language of children. Couple of examples. Kids have little power. They want power. And so give them stuff proactively. I tell Alexander, he can pick the restaurants. His room can be a little messy. He can go to bed a little bit later. And so as a result of that, Alexander is constantly in a debtor position with me. He always owes me stuff. And so when I ask him to do things, he does them for me. Also, I tend to respect Alexander. I come home from work, he's watching TV again. I don't shut off the TV. I think to myself, well, sometimes I come home, I'm stressed out, I have a drink, maybe the kid's stressed out from elementary school. I mean, kids get stressed out. So I want to have a conversation about it. How's your stress level? You need to watch TV to relieve stress. Even if that's not the reason, he respects the question. And we'll have a better relationship. The third thing is, kids are very incremental. So you want to be incremental. You won't clean your room. Will you clean a quarter of your room? Will you clean a half of your room? A couple of months ago, my kid wouldn't do his math homework. It was 7:30 at night. My wife said, do your homework now. He said, how about 8:30? My wife went ballistic. I said to Alexander, how about 7:33? He said, okay. My wife said, what? And the thing was, kids are incremental. Can I have a cookie? Can I have a half a cookie? Can I have a quarter of a cookie? And so what I was trying to say to Alexander is, I speak your language, and in return for that, he gave me a 57-minute concession. And so those are ways to deal with kids. There's a chapter in the book about kids. I want to mention not to walk out of negotiations unless it's a mutual agreement, because the signal to the other party is, I don't even care enough about you to give you the time of day. It's a bad signal. The last major point I want to make to you, and there's more of it in the book, and I'd like to commend it to you, is to deal with hard bargainers in particular, learn their standards, learn how they make decisions, what are their policies, quote their stated policies. If their website says they care about their customers and they're late delivering your cable TV box or they overcharge you on the phone, you want to say to the customer service rep, well, I read on your website that customers are the most important part of your business. How does that dovetail with this situation? I was just curious. And you will find that they will be nicer to you. Along with that, what are the exceptions to policy? Has the airline ever made an exception to its $200 change fee? have you ever allowed after a 1 o'clock checkout in the hotel? Fit within one of the exceptions. Asking for exceptions should be hardwired to your brain. Want to mention just 3 very quick examples of this. I had a student went to McDonald's 5 to 11 on a weeknight. French fries were soggy 5 minutes before closing time. Clerk wouldn't make any more French fries without going ballistic. The student picked up the freshness guarantee, which guarantees fresh French fries during all business hours, showed it to the clerk, got fresh French fries. No muss, no fuss. In a million different ways, your life will be better. Had another student rented a car from Avis in Albuquerque for spring break. He got 100 miles from the shop and realized he paid too much for the car, 1 class higher than he got. Didn't want to drive back at the end of a week. Handed in the car and said to the clerk, I need a 1 class credit, and she said you can't have the credit because it says in the contract that you pay for the car you signed for when you leave the lot. And she turned over the contract, and there was his signature on the bottom of the contract. So he immediately looked at this contract and said to the service rep, it's not my responsibility to read this contract. And she said, why not? And he said, look at this contract. You can't even read this contract. And if you know what rental car contracts look like, they're 8-point light gray type on light pink paper. Why, he said, if it was my responsibility to read this contract, your slogan would not be, we try harder, it would be, you try harder. He got the credit. One more example, I had a student from Wharton who got a job at McKinsey, and she thought she deserved a $30,000 extra signing bonus because she had 8 years of experience in the media entertainment department of PricewaterhouseCoopers in LA, and she was going into that department at McKinsey. Her boss-to-be agreed with her, but said, I'm sorry, I can't do it, my hands are tied. McKinsey's got a one-firm policy. She thought about her goals, which were get more money soon, so she said to her boss-to-be, when is the first time McKinsey is allowed to pay a bonus to a new hire? And her boss-to-be said 3 months, and she said, why don't you just give me the $30,000 in 3 months? And her boss said, sure. That negotiation took less time than it took to tell it to you. The one thing you can't do is make yourself the issue using standards. The more outrageous they become, the more calm you have to become. Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Barack Obama in the second presidential debate. It's very, very powerful. I tend to say, be extreme or come to me. If you will come to me, we'll be collaborative. If you want to be extreme without making myself the issue, you can drive yourself off the cliff. So if they cheat me, I'm happy, we just made money. Well, tell me about what you've done here, and do you think this is a good way to operate? You know, we've tried to reach you 20 times in the last week. We apologize for doing something wrong. What have we done wrong? Those are irresistible questions. What do you like most about our competitors and hate the most about us? Those are questions that should be part of your stock in trade. Whatever these tools are, none work all the time, and some don't work half the time. But they work more than if you don't use them. And so let's say we're working on an easy case. You say it doesn't work over here. And I say forget about it, never works over there. But if you can increase your hit rate a few percent in your life, you'll be fabulously more successful. And so, did I mention to you the baseball analogy? There we go. 280 hitter, 310 hitter, that's basically it. So here is, in a nutshell, the 3 questions to ask. What do I want at the end of the process I don't have now? Who are these people? And given the first 2, what will it take to persuade them? Different in every situation. I wanted to end with a little anecdote based on this notion of being incremental, asking for something smaller. The world should follow the technology industry's lead. Start small, put in scalability. Had they done that 30 years ago with one healthcare facility or one factory in the Middle East, we'd have a great healthcare plan and peace in the Middle East. So many politicians don't know from the concept of scalability. You can make the difference in your own life by shortening the question, whatever you do, and scaling it up from there. The anecdote I want to mention to you is I had a woman in my class some years ago whose 5-year-old daughter fell in the kitchen one Saturday morning and gashed her forehead on the sharp corner of the kitchen table. The child was hysterical. The child's grandfather, the father of this student, was hysterical. And the student was about to become hysterical when she suddenly stopped herself and said to herself, wait a minute, I'm taking a negotiation course. I'm going to negotiate this. And the issue was the child clearly had to go to the hospital to get stitches. She eventually got 12. She wouldn't go. She was clinging onto the table for dear life, and nobody could pry her little fingers off the kitchen table. So her mother walked over to her daughter and said to her daughter, does Mommy love you? Her daughter said yes. Her mother said, would Mommy do anything to hurt you? Her daughter said no. Her mother said, when we get to be big people, do we have to do things sometimes we don't like to do? Her daughter said yes. Her mother said, Mommy has stitches, showed her scar. Granddaddy has stitches, showed his scar, and within 5 minutes, her daughter picked herself up and walked to the car by herself. And so think about this in the concept of being incremental. The mother thinks the daughter feels alone and in pain, and so she asks, does Mommy love you? An emotional payment, the first increment, goes right into the daughter's brain. The daughter then realizes that she's not alone, but still in pain. The mother then says, would Mommy do anything to hurt you? And so step by step, you can bring somebody a vast distance in a short period of time. If you start with the pictures in their head, give them emotional payments, and take them step by step. And if they say, are you being incremental with me? You say, absolutely. Is there anything wrong with us pursuing a less risky path? If they say, you're using standards on me, you say, what's wrong with your standards? And so this is a transparent process, not a manipulative one. The best thing you can do is share these tools with others. You'll all bring down a deer together. Now, some people say, how do I replicate this? It seems extraordinary. And so for some situations in the book, I give more than one example, some extraordinary situations, and this is one of them. About a year ago, when I was going to a Google workshop in India, I was in a car on the way to the airport, and somebody called me, Craig Silverman, a Long Island investment counsel who had taken the course, and he said, I just want to tell you something I thought you might be interested in. This morning I went for a routine blood test at a blood lab, and before I could get the test, there was this blood-curdling scream from the next room. A young girl, my nurse left me hanging there and went to the next room. This went on for several minutes, and finally I decided to investigate. He said, I went to the next room, and there was this poor little girl, 5 or 6 years old. Her mother was holding her shoulders back and pinning her. One of the nurses had pinned her arm to the table, and the other nurse was trying to stick this needle in her arm. And so Craig walked over to the girl's mother and said, can I talk to your daughter for a minute? Mother said, okay. Craig went over to the girl and said, look at me. Do you think your mommy loves you? Girl said, yes. Craig said, do you think your mommy would do anything to hurt you? Girl said, no. And within 2 minutes, she had calmed down and was ready to get the needle. He said, they looked at me like I was a magician. They said, where did you learn that? And to his credit, he asked them to buy my book. Thank you very much. Questions, anybody? I'm here to answer questions on any subject involving negotiations. I'm sure somebody has a question. Who's tried something that hasn't worked? Who's tried something that's frustrated you? And so forth.
Got one.
Yes.
So we're in the negotiating process for a house right now.
Yes.
Probably a common situation. And there are, of course, several layers of people in between us and the sellers. how can we apply your tactics if we don't even have communication directly with the sellers?
The reason that there are several layers between you and the other party is the brokers feel fear that you'll steal the client. That's why. And so you've got to address that explicitly and to say, I think you probably don't want me to talk to the other party because you're afraid that something will happen with the commissions. So I like to sign the most draconian non-circumvention agreement you can come up with to protect you. But doesn't it seem to you that making a personal connection with the other party would be better? Tell me what they're thinking and feeling. We'll bake their favorite bread. We'll wear their favorite color, etc. If you can't do that, you've got to train them to be your advocate. They've got to find out the pictures in the head of the other party, and they have to do it for you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi. Thanks for coming. Really enjoyed the talk.
Yes.
So while I generally think the approach that you're advocating is really good, and I try to employ very similar, what about a negotiation for a new car? I mean, does the person on the other side of that really have an interest in my caring about
for a
them
new
as a person?
car? A couple of things, and there's a section about new cars in here. First of all, you do want to use standards, of course, what these things cost, but the other party cares a lot more than price. When you look up at the leaderboard in a car dealership, you'll see that the sales reps are rated not on price, but on units sold. So the faster you tell the other person you're ready to buy a car, the better price you're going to get. Here's my contract. I will buy that car for $300 over your cost. Right now, here's a certified check. Your commitment makes you more powerful. In addition to that, there are all kinds of other things mentioned in the book that you can ask for, discounts on options, better servicing. I want a rental car for free every time I bring my car in for servicing. I negotiated that with my dealership, and I'm one of the few people who gets that. And so there's various things. That's another department. That's okay. You know them better than I do. Go talk to them. I'll wait.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Okay.
Thanks for coming. I wasn't sure exactly how to phrase this question, whether I should say, how do you negotiate with incompetent people, or maybe a better way of asking the question is, how do you negotiate with bureaucracy when you're faced with dealing with a wall of bureaucracy?
Yes.
and kind of
Sure.
going beyond that?
Several responses. First, use their standards. Second, make a connection with the person across from you who wants to feel their power. When a cop stops you, you apologize. When you come to the window of a bureaucrat at the motor vehicle department, you ask them how their day was. Those are things that you should do with bureaucracy. You acknowledge their power, or you use their standards. Those are the kind of things that I would do with bureaucracies. Do you have a specific example in mind I can address?
Well, I'm currently in the process of negotiating with Board of Education for services for my daughter, for special needs services. So it's a lot of bureaucracy that you have to navigate, and we're exploring getting an advocate, which a special needs advocate, which is interesting it's useful in that it gives us additional information, but I also realize it's going to up the stakes once we kind of go into a meeting with a hired gun.
Has this bureaucracy before ever done this more quickly so the child doesn't have to wait? How you give a vision for somebody, my daughter has these needs, how long should she wait? Bring her with you when you ask people that question. How long should Judith Allison have to wait? What do you think, Judith? It's really hard for them. The more you paint a picture for somebody else, the more persuaded they're going to be.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks for coming today. So I got from your talk that when you're making a negotiation, you should first take the emotional temperature of the other party.
Yes.
And then make an emotional payment, right? Now, does it make a difference whether the other party can sense that you have an ulterior motive for making the emotional payment?
A good question. I want to do things that are going to seem fair tomorrow as well as today. So I'm not going to do anything to hurt them. I'm also, in fact, going to get them to do things they would otherwise not do. I don't define manipulation as getting people to do things they would otherwise not do. I define manipulation as hurting people. So if they say, are you making an emotional payment? I want to say, absolutely. Don't you want one? In other words, this is a transparent process. You have an ulterior motive. My ulterior motive is to make sure we both benefit from this negotiation. That's not win-win, it's both benefit. You benefit by trading items of unequal value. You benefit by giving each other emotional payments. It's much more specific than win-win, but I want to make sure that we both get something here that benefits us. And so I think that I owe you something, some empathy, some apology. Please tell me whether I'm right or wrong. So I'm going to be very explicit about it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi. How do you negotiate with a party where there's a huge disbalance in trust? And,
a huge imbalance. You need to say, there's a huge imbalance in trust. What do we do?
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, there's also a disbalance in understanding of what we're negotiating.
Okay.
If the subject is difficult enough so the other party doesn't understand it and couldn't make a coherent proposal to counter yours.
Right. If you cannot understand what you're negotiating, you should not start the negotiation. The first thing you have to do is know where you're going. If you don't, it's like getting into the car and saying, I'm driving to San Diego, I don't know where it is, I don't have a map. Okay, you're not going to get there very well. So you really have to spend time discussing what the parties' understandings are. And yes, the less skilled they are, the more differences there are between the parties, the more time it's going to take. But if you don't do it this way, you'll never get there.
So you think the education of the other party of their goals is the most important?
Yeah, these tools are morally neutral. You can help people, you can hurt people. You've got to decide how much help you want to give to them. I tend to help people as much as I can. Otherwise, it's like an amateur driver in the Indy 500 race. You crash a lot.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Hi. Quick question from Ann Arbor.
Oh.
Can they hear us? Oh, okay.
Where are you? Okay.
No, we can't.
I'm sorry? Okay, go ahead.
There's a door usually.
Oh, okay. Can you hear us from Ann Arbor?
Yes, perfectly.
No. Oh, you. Oh, okay. Quick question. I was wondering if in your book you cover how to handle mother-in-law, father-in-law.
Oh, you look up mother-in-law, you'll have lots of citations. We don't leave mother-in-laws out of any book on negotiation.
Okay, great.
And that includes mother-in-laws and weddings.
And what?
At weddings.
Oh, at weddings. Okay.
And weddings and other things. Okay. Yes.
Hi, thanks for coming. My question is, what if we try our best to use your tools to sort of drive across the point we want to make with another party, and yet it's just not succeeding?
All
the
right.
other party is unresponsive.
Okay.
What do you suggest would be
this
the best?
Is, again, I want to try to drum this in your heads. This is really key. The best thing you have is your credibility, and you want to be real. You want to say, you know, I'm a failure. I have tried to convince you. I've been totally unsuccessful. I've tried all these things. Do you have any advice for me?
Yeah.
That's what you want to do. Yes. It's disarming when you do that. Last question, okay? Anybody? Okay, one more? Not one more. Okay, thank you all very much.